Good space time, y'all! A validator-focused episode on Citizen Cosmos, this time with Mircea from Cephalopod and Informal Systems. A lot of interesting thoughts from one of the top validators in the space, including such topics as distributed systems, break-in software, and the cooperation between humans. The point where the bandwidth protocol needs some level of communication.
It's their network. That's where the validator is. That's where their business is. And the IBC was a core part of this network from the start, even though it didn't come with it from the start.
Let's talk about break-in software.
Guys, try to develop something for it. Do an application and let's see how it handles and see if it's appropriate for your use case. So it should be both at the same time, right? When we have a basic infrastructure, what we really, really need now is more apps on top of it.
The assumptions and the presumptions of the ability of the networks are much larger of the capacity of what they are able to do, able to process, to the reality of where the network actually is working.
My personal goal is to preach this from the top. The highest mountain is like, slow down, man. Take a day off. Think about other things. Ideas will come.
Before we rock it off into our next episode, here are some news from the sponsor of this episode, Cyber. The bootloader network Bostrom is launched and has grown to over 500 daily active citizens. The data oracle has grown to over 10,000 cyberlinks, and the current main focus of the development is the upcoming drop. Welcome to the show, man. Mircea is the guy taking care of Cephalopod equipment. He's also one of the lead engineers for Informal Systems. Am I right?
Yes. We don't really have leads as per se. We're very hipster that way. We have not a flat org, but titles aren't that important. But I'm one of the engineers at Informal. I do take care of Cephalopod's infrastructure and shit talk on the internet with people. So it's basically what we all do.
I'm really excited about this one because I think you work for one of the core organizations that commits so much to Cosmos, and I would love to hear your thoughts and your opinions here. And you're taking care of one of, well, not the biggest in proof of stakes, but I guess you're one of the top. I mean, you're 27 in Cosmos Hub, right? And what's your TVL right now? Do you know in Cephalopod? Sorry for the pop question.
No, I don't actually know. A couple of million atoms there. I think we're 20. I think I just looked last week and we were 20, something like that. We're on a couple of other networks too. We're definitely not the biggest. We're a fairly independent operation, so to speak. There's other more conglomerate, validators on the network. We like it this way. We try to be decentralization and everything.
What's the relation between Informal Systems and Cephalopod equipment?
It's a complicated relationship. Let's put it that way. That's how it started out. The founders of Cephalopod also are the founders of Informal, and currently, we're working towards making Cephalopod just a subsidiary to simplify accounting and make life easier. It's easier to explain to people, right? Everybody's confused. But then again, I guess that's, the case in Cosmos with Cosmos Hub, but Cosmos.
My guess that it was, especially since speaking to Ethan and then speaking to a couple of more guys from Informal, my stab at it, and of course, correct me if I'm wrong, that at one point, the validator obviously was probably started by Ethan. And then essentially it was like the idea was to give it to the collective that you guys have it Informal. Am I somewhere right or am I completely wrong?
I don't actually know. I wasn't privy with the Cephalopod itself. It was started by Ethan with two other people from formerly known as, when they were still at Tendermint, AIB. So it was supposed to be dogfooding your own network. Informal also has the idea that every business or every avenue that they're in will eventually spin out in its own business. So that still is the case. They're currently spinning it in because it's easier, but as soon as it's able to stand more on its own, the idea is that it will spin out again and be independent. But yeah, so that's pretty much the short of it. It was concocted while we were all working at Tendermint, so 3 years ago, something like that. 4 years ago, huh?
What about yourself? I mean, you said like the idea of Informal is that each business ends up as their own branch. I mean, obviously somebody who works with Informal, I don't want to say for, it sounds a bit too much. What about your opinion? Is that what you also believe in, that like each business that starts should develop eventually at the side and not in the center? Or what's your view on that?
Well, personally, I'm just a tech guy. Thoroughly dislike the business side of business. But I see that as a natural thing, right? As something gets larger and more heftier to manage, eventually it'll have its own interests that may diverge from the initial operation, or simply just to keep things less complicated, or I should say sort of more focused, right? When you're part of a larger organization, eventually things get pulled this way or that way. Maybe you want to spin out and just focus on your core. That hasn't happened yet, so this is a concept that still needs to be tested. So we'll see how that works.
Let's talk to you as a validator now for a second, like take off the hat of Informal. What's your mission, goal, ideas in terms of the technical side? Where do you see Cephalopod like developing in that side? More like making tools, or more to provide an infrastructure work, or anything else at all?
Both to start. Like I'm going to reiterate that I'm a technical guy. So where I see Cephalopod going is being one of multiple node operators and relayer operators and tools developer. I think it's already pretty well known fact that the community itself really likes diversity. So we'd like to be, well, not just us. We would also like to collaborate and empower other smaller validators to be a true community of validators, right? Rather than conglomerate into one giant thing. Usually things like this tend to do that, right? It's easier to operate at scale from one entity rather than many. It's very hard to cooperate when there's so many different people in different parts of the world. But ideally, that's what Cephalopod is trying to work to being just one member of a bigger community of node operators, relayer operators, and validators too. That being said, we would also eventually have to start offering things like white label validation, where if you have a number of tokens on a network, you necessarily want to also take care of operating infrastructure. So you just come to us and we do it for you. But these are long-term goals. We'll see. It's very unclear right now where things are heading.
I had definitely noticed that I think Cephalopod is one of those validators who, let's say, I see you guys all the time in the media space on Twitter and stuff, like not just talking about the networks that you validate, but you always try to mention other things and like repost things, repost people. And I've noticed that, yeah, again, this is not the technical side of things, but still, I think it helps to show people that you don't only need to concentrate, I guess, on what you're doing and maybe spread more love kind of thing. But going to the technical side, as somebody who you already pointed yourself out as more of the tech guy, I like that. Let's talk about both like Relaying and about the way that Relaying is structured, architecture right now. Do you think that that could be improved, or do you think that that's a good architecture and that's perfect and we can take it to the end of the world?
Is that a trick question? There's always room for improvement, right? The current state of relaying definitely is just an embryo of what it's going to be. Everything from the way that the software operates to the fees that are charged to even the model, where we're still kind of poking at things and see what works. There's the initial relaying model where there's a relayer between two networks, and if any network wants to connect to another network, they have to do it directly. There's also Jack from Strangelove also introduced the concept of the hub as a router, or maybe another chain, but the hub would be best as a router for IBC, right? So if a chain wants to connect to another chain, it's cheaper for it to connect to the hub first, and then from the hub it goes there. So that's the technical side of it. There's also, like I said, the feed side. It's very expensive now. Even that still, there's lots of bugs to be ironed out, so that there's a lot of extra fees being spent right now on IBC transactions that can be practically eliminated once the software is in a better state. Specifically relating to having two or more IBC transactions for the same message, that all of the relayers that operate on that channel will pay the transaction fee when only one of them actually does it. So I guess that's in the short future, that's the biggest gain that we have to do. And from there on, we'll see. It depends on the volume of IBC. It keeps going up and keeps needing more nodes. So we'll see where that leads.
I don't remember who this conversation was with. It was between me and somebody on Twitter. Maybe it was Jack. I don't remember, to be honest, a little while ago, and about talking exactly what you mentioned. And well, I think we can safely assume to a big extent that the number of ABC transactions is going to grow. I mean, we can already, based on the statistics that we have. And I think essentially we will have to come to a point where the bandwidth protocol needs some level of communication as well between those relays. I think we still don't understand how big it's going to be, and it will be interesting to see where the market and the development take it. That's why I'm like really curious at like poking your thoughts about the modeling, because I know you guys at Informal always work on those things. You do like some with Hermes and you do all the other work, so that's why I know you probably have some information that I'm trying to get out.
Well, personally, I think that relaying should be the responsibility of validators. So eventually, I don't see relaying being as a market by itself. I mean, it's possible that it turns out that way. It's possible that users accept paying their own fees and picking and choosing which relayer to relay their transaction. But that, to me personally, feels like a very heavy-handed way to handle this. It should be, from where I see it, it should be a validator's responsibility on any network to relay to and from the network. And it should be fairly transparent to the users, right? I mean, when you're on the internet, you're not choosing who your DNS server. I mean, yes, you can, but it's your average internet user doesn't care. So, and they pay their ISP a set fee a month, and then that's it. It's the same with this. You delegate your tokens to some validator, have them take care of everything, right? They're the IBC there, and it feels a bit complex. It's already complex as a user, right? It's already so many things you have to keep track of. You always have to be aware of addresses, wallets. A little mistake can leave you broke. So adding more and more stuff to that feels like it just encumbers the user. So I'd like it to go the other way, where it's a one-click thing and user doesn't care.
When you say validator responsibilities, because you did, I'm not going to stick to those words, feel free to change them. But of course, from the technical side of things, it's quite obvious. We have the uptime, we have the architecture of the way you put the sentry nodes and the nodes and so on and so forth, whatever. You sign in transactions, everything is good. The technical side is more or less, I guess, plus you added relaying, more or less understood. Would you add anything else to those responsibilities that you think should be operators or validators' responsibility?
Can't think of other things right now. I'm sure there'll be other operations for the network, other use cases for the network when they come up. And the reason I use that word pretty deliberately, responsibility, right? It's their network. That's where the validators, that's where their business is. And the IBC was a core part of this network from the start, even though it didn't come with it from the start. Batteries weren't included, but this was understood to be where it was heading, right? It's supposed to be the internet of blockchain, and the validators are the bedrocks of that internet. I don't see why they wouldn't operate a relayer. I mean, it depends on the software too. Who knows in 2-3 years where the software is and how it's run. But as it is right now, validators should, as much as they can, obviously, it's also expensive to run a relayer, try to run it and try to keep the channels open. But that being said, it is expensive to run a relayer. You need nodes on every network. You need backup nodes on every network. You need archive nodes on every network, because if something happens to your main node, then you need to backtrack and clear the channel. So it takes a lot of effort, financial, people-wise. You have to keep an eye on it all the time. So yeah, while it is a responsibility, it's a very big responsibility. So I can understand how right now only larger operations, maybe such as ourselves, are able to do it.
I totally agree, because we currently validate mainnets too, which is like Cosmos Hub and Cyber. And we wanted to launch a relayer because they only have Notional and another from Bro and Bro. And it wasn't more about the money. It was more about like the operational power. We physically have no chance of like doing it. And I understand it's crazy. Yeah, totally. But I'm going to ask a strange, crazy question. Do you think that in the future, with development of, well, everything really, do you think that future relayers will be in the form of DAOs and not in the form of standalone or a couple of servers or whatever? Or it would be like a collective kind of thing, which is some distributed relayer, which is managed by a distributed, I don't know what cryptography you would need for that, but yeah.
Well, it's definitely getting there. I think people are starting to realize that, like I said, you need nodes, right? That's what we really need, nodes on the network. And to take it back to what I was saying about the community, if validators and relayer operators, if they all started offering nodes on the network publicly available, then anybody can pick up a relayer. Running the relayer itself isn't that hard. Keeping the nodes that the relayer connects to, that's the complex part of it. So if and when those nodes start to be publicly available, which in and of itself is hard, keeping it public, especially with the state of the software right now, where blasting a node with queries can easily just stop it eventually. So keeping a node public on the internet is double hard, because as soon as you're open to the internet, you're open to all the script kiddies out there that scan all your ports all the time and send all sorts of junk traffic to you. So it's a tough problem to solve, especially when we're talking about most operations are, just like you guys, a couple of people. And so are we. We're just growing our team now, which I find incredibly hard. And just a couple of people, so it's hard to do that. And most of the other Lavender or Crypto Crew, Notional went on hiring spree, though. They're 4 or 5 now.
I don't want to ask you to give a lecture, but I'm going to ask you a question which I, as an operator of a validator or as a validator, I don't know, everybody prefers their own fancy names, get asked a lot. So I'm going to ask you, as somebody who's a professional, what is your first security advice for somebody who wants to start out a Cosmos validator? Not necessarily Cosmos Hub, any Cosmos ecosystem. What's your security advices for them?
Buy an HSM, the hardware security module. That's basically it. Start from there, and that's 50% of your security, basically. Other than that, try to not keep all your sentries in the same cloud. If you're well funded, try to not keep sentries in the cloud at all and have some data centers around the world.
Local machines.
Local machines, yeah. I mean, don't keep local machines. Try to keep it in the data center somewhere.
If you have 5 big cables, if you have all the super cables in the world, transatlantic internet cable. No, that's good advice.
Yeah, if you can hook in straight into that, if you can hook in straight into the transatlantic cable, then you're good.
It's funny, like I reside on Madeira, which is like an Atlantic Ocean. It's an island, and we have actually a lot of transatlantic cables like that go through Madeira. Apparently, most of them. So, if anything, I can just like pull out the cable quickly and have a good connection.
You can censor a whole continent from there.
Yeah. It's like a switch off America. Yeah, that's it. Switch off Europe. That's it. Yeah. I thought about this before. I just didn't want to take the conversation this way. But we were talking briefly. You mentioned like ISPs and DNS and that you can choose your own. And I keep mentioning them at the podcast. But it's just because I really like the project. Have you ever heard of a project called Urbit?
No, actually.
Check it out. These guys, they do like, I don't want to get advertised too much, but just check it out. And it's a lot about like the servers, the DNS, the separate thing. And it's interesting. It's the old project. And it's exactly what you mentioned, that where a computer is actually able to choose their own DNS or actually is able to leave their own ISP provider DNS. So that's pretty cool. But back to you, back to Cosmos. Man, I'm going to read this out because there was something in your description somewhere, which I wanted to ask you about. There we go. He specializes in designing and implementing infrastructure solutions on many platforms and at break-in software. I like that. So let's talk about break-in software, man. Let's talk about that.
It goes to my beginnings in the space. I used to be a QA engineer, and a video game tester before even that. So yeah, breaking software is basically it. Just use it in ways that it's not meant to be used to see how it's going to break, right? So take notes, for example, try to stress test them, see when they break, see when they memory leak, all sorts of crazy stuff. But the one thing I don't like, which we do a lot in this ecosystem, is doing that in production. It goes back to the fact that there's not a lot of people working on here. Organizations are slim, so having to maintain a whole dev environment isn't usually a thing that is afforded. So you have to test in production. So you do put, let's swap out database backend. Let's, and see. Fingers crossed.
Bring back normal databases. Yes, bring them back.
I mean, we're going that way, right? We're now streaming events to Postgres, and that's probably going to be the layer that serves. And it makes sense too. The node itself in the database for the blockchain isn't really particularly suited for doing queries like that. And we can see too that's one of the reasons why IBC is so tender right now, is because it relies on these nodes to query historical state, whereas it was a traditional relational database. It would have been much cheaper to do that, much faster too. It could handle a lot more queries. But yeah, breaking software. So it's as simple as it is. Stake it and do stuff with it that is not meant to be done with it, and then see where it breaks or where it can move faster.
Talking about databases, do you think in theory, though, let's again do some fantasy here, fantasizing. Well, we're already doing a lot in blockchain, but let's do a little bit more. Over time of explaining to people who are not into blockchain about blockchain, I found that, well, the easiest thing is not to talk about blockchain, but like one of the easiest way is just to explain to a person that it's just a superior database in some meaning. But obviously, being on a technical side, we all understand that, well, there is like the cost of querying, there is the speed, the bandwidth with which it all can work. So, like, in your opinion, can blockchain become a superior database to a regular database in all of the senses, whether this is like security, bandwidth, speed, cost of use, whatever, everything else? And will everybody be using blockchains instead of normal databases in I don't know, in 5 years or 10 years?
The short answer to that is hell no.
Damn no.
like everything in software, right? Like people tend to do this in software sometimes. They're like, oh, this is going to be, and it's like, no, man, what the hell? It's a distributed database. That's when people ask me what's blockchain, I'm saying it's a new model of distributed database. That's basically it. And when it gets down to the technical side of it, it's not much more than that. It might be, the best thing there is for some use cases. And I'm sure that it will be that for some use cases, but for others, definitely not. And you can already see it. Like I said, we're already putting a relational layer in between blockchain and the user because it's not meant for that. It's meant to be a ledger. It's meant to be distributed. So for what it's meant to be, it's going to be great. For what it's not meant to be, we shouldn't try to shoehorn it in there, because that's how we end up with all sorts of garbage software out there already, right? Note on the server.
Talking about like distributed software in general, it's not funny, I guess, but maybe ironic in some way that people try to attach magical things like attributes to a database, which again, yes, in a sense, there is some things that are cool, like distributed consensus, like, like timestamps and everything like that. But a lot of people, when they ask, oh, how do you evaluate a blockchain project? Well, very simple. It's a computer. If you have bandwidth, storage, and computation, it's going to work, right? If you don't, it's not going to work. This is actually a question to you. I guess you have a lot of, or some definitely, from what I hear and read, like experience in building distributed software. Where do you think we are in terms of, and this is like $1 million question, some people say we're like at the infrastructure level. Some people say, no, the infrastructure is ready. Let's like start building applications now. Where, in your opinion, are we like in terms of building distributed or decentralized software that is actually going to be used?
Definitely there's not one before the other, right? Because you can't build the infrastructure first. In order to build the infrastructure, you have to know what's going to be on top of it. So sure, we can start with some ideas, which we have, right? We have DeFi and digital ID and the song, whatever music rights, what's the song, and it all kind of concentrated in this, digital asset space. So now we're kind of building the infrastructure towards that with assumptions about uptime and accessibility and the speed of transactions and whatnot. But that doesn't really compare to something like gaming, for example. For gaming, distributed database doesn't make too much sense. It might for some particular types of games, for example, but for a first-person shooter, you don't need a blockchain. You might need it for the store, for the NFTs and whatnot, but to run the actual application on top of it, you don't. So to answer your question, we're at the very beginnings of finding out what infrastructure to build for what apps, which is why I keep poking people all of the time. Guys, try to develop something for it. Do an application and let's see how it handles and see if it's appropriate for your use case. So it should be both at the same time, right? When we have a basic infrastructure, what we really, really need now is more apps on top of it to see how it behaves so that we can inform ourselves where to go from here. That being said, there's definitely big wins still to be had. So it's far from anywhere, any perfect state. There's still easy wins to be had. We definitely need to start having applications on top of it so we know where to go.
For sure. I mean, mass adoptions have always happened at application level. I mean, I don't think there's been a case in the history of humankind where I cannot think of one on top of my head, not for sure. Staying on the subject, as an engineer for Informal Systems, what are you currently most excited about that you can share in terms of what you're working on behind the scenes or not behind the scenes, whatever you feel like sharing?
Definitely. So aside from Cephalopod, the most excited I am about is our formal verification method and language that is being worked on. That's the one thing I understand least about, but that excites me the most because it teases the possibility that software can be a lot more reliable, where you can run a model-based tester on your software and you can be reasonably certain that it's not going to lose all your tokens or something like that, that you won't get into hacks and all sorts of things. So it's a reasonable bet your software is secure. That being said, I don't understand it. It's something that bigger brains than mine work on, but it's very, very exciting. So Informal Systems, that's what I'm hoping our biggest export, aside from Cephalopod, will be formal verification. And I hope that more and more blockchain projects, I should say, resort to this kind, or don't just see it as, a thing we have to do an audit. Just like they get excited about it. They get excited about, because I was talking about breaking software. That's what formal verification does. It comes in and says, hey, your software is going to break there. So I hope everybody gets excited about this because that's how good software gets made. And we do have, to brag a little, we have some very big brains at Informal working on this. I'm always the least smartest in the room when these guys get together, for sure.
Usually when people say that, it means you have to pay attention more to them. So, but to everybody who's listening, definitely, guys, like we have an episode with Jarko from Informal Systems where we talk about for 25, 30 minutes about formal verifications, because it is a very interesting thing that I think will be very, very exciting to see or implemented. I mean, I can imagine, though, it's interesting that it makes the assumption that we're going to see a lot of shit come into Cosmos that we really need that. But it's true, right? I mean, if you create something that's adopted and used, you get things from everywhere, I guess. But man, you mentioned gaming. And I read, I think, somewhere that when you're not busy breaking software, you're into Rocket League.
Yeah, probably too much, yes. I'm a huge gamer. I've been a gamer for 30 years now. Before Rocket League, it was League of Legends. Before that, it was StarCraft. And my Steam collection is very large. So let's just put it that way.
Which side did you play StarCraft on?
Oh, Zerg. That was Zerg.
Okay. I wasn't a big StarCraft gamer, but I did. So I do remember that. But why football? I mean, like, how did you go from StarCraft to, or is it about the strategy and not about the context?
No, it's about the football. I'm also a big football fan. I'm Eastern European. Well, Romanians in particular are very football crazy. Soccer for the people that are in North America. So I've been football crazy since I was 10, and then football and video games and remote control cars. And it's also a very competitive game, so it tickled everything for me.
Have you ever built your own remote? Because I know a lot of engineers who I know from younger age. Quite everybody I know used to try and build their own remote control cars or their own robots. Have you also done that?
Well, when I was a kid, I gave it a shot, but there weren't the resources back then weren't available that much. So that's how I ended up with computers, because those were more readily available, and you could tinker with a computer without needing to take it apart that much. You go into BIOS and overclock it. So,
just nuke the BIOS and that's it.
Yeah, especially when it's your dad's computer and you pay like a year's salary for it.
Yeah, I remember very, very well, like growing up in Eastern Europe and computers, and how crazy that was, and how rare, how lucky you would be to have access to a real computer, and not to one of the typing machines. That I have a typing machine.
I know, man. It goes to that community feeling, right? We used to have a neighbor with one of the kids would get a computer or a PlayStation, and then everybody was at their house doing it.
What's the first game that you remember playing?
I can't remember how it's called. It was this 2D side scroller where you played a wizard. It was on a 286, and then also pinball. The same 286 had pinball.
Nice. What about shooters? You said that shooters don't need a blockchain, right? So especially not for the computing, like whatever the graphics is designed in there. What was the first shooter you played? Do you remember?
Oh, that one for sure. That was Quake.
Nice.
That's where I guess I got the competitive edge going, because it was Quake and then Quake Arena. We used to have a LAN, right? I would throw the Ethernet cable from 7th floor down to my 4th floor neighbor, and then from his to his 1st floor neighbor, and then we would do a LAN party in the building.
So to take it back to Cosmos, well, I personally don't like the word metaverse. To me, it's just like an analog of the word internet, but let's use the word metaverse for the sake of it. Do you think that we will see Decentraland style metaverses, or let's call it that, develop on Cosmos in the near future?
Are you asking me specifically about the VR world, or?
No, I mean like something that size, something that is like big and really has use in terms of, well, decentralized, I guess, is probably the best example we have today, right? Of a decentralized or as close to that system that's like working in that direction. And it'd be interesting. Do you think that Cosmos would also see those kind of things?
I haven't actually given it much thought, to be honest with you. It's the metaverse and the whole that whole scene is, to me, is kind of like meh. So I haven't really thought about it that much, to be honest with you. It's always been something that people talk about, so it didn't really interest me. I played Second Life a couple of times. that was my biggest experience.
Are they still alive? Are they still around, Second Life?
Oh yeah, for sure. I don't know. Like I said, I only tried a couple of times, but they're still around. They're still going. They have a very dedicated following.
Because I remember they had a huge problem with all the legal side, and at one point the users like kept on dropping like Rockstone because of all the legal problems. Maybe question about, still in the same direction, about developing software for decentralized or distributed environments. I mean, in security, you spoke about securities use keys, hardware wallets, keys, HSMs, YubiKeys, whatever. But what about like in generally developing software in the distributed realm? Is it different in your opinion to developing software in the normal realm? And how, and what's your advice here to people who try to only learn the world of blockchain in terms of development? I mean,
the biggest difference in development is testing. It's hard to test a distributed system because in your local environment, it's hard to simulate it. And as soon as you try to get out of your local environment, you need other people. or you need the resources to have your network distributed on truly distributed network, right? In order to truly test something like that, you would need to have a node in the cloud, one in data center, one on your laptop, one across the world, on another continent. So it's really hard to properly test. And we've seen this a lot. In my thinking, a lot of blockchain issues, like you see all projects now and then, oh, it got hacked, oh, there's a bug, this and that. I think a big part of that is the lack of testing infrastructure for something like this. It's the hardest thing in distributed systems, as far as I'm concerned. That's why I'm also, to double back to that, very excited about formal verification, because it would ease the burden a bit on this. A lot of edge cases that probably wouldn't run into until the network is live and you have a truly distributed system may come up during formal verification. So yeah, it's a +1 for that. Other than that, I don't think it's that different. You do have to think a bit more about consensus, whereas when you're just writing an app that's not distributed, that's not there. So you're not worrying, but that's the beauty of Tendermint. You develop your app and then Tendermint takes care of consensus. So you don't really have to care about it that much.
It's interesting because you're definitely by far not the first and definitely not the last person that talks about testing. And I've, over the last 5 or 6 years, like working in the blockchain industry, I've seen so many fuck ups with that are done at those stages, and like the assumptions and the presumptions of the ability of the networks are much larger of the capacity of what they are able to do, able to process, to the reality of where the network actually is working, and the channels are, like we talked about, the internet and everything. And there's so many little things that people don't think about. Then, but if you could like now give an advice to yourself, that you just like starting out working in blockchain some years ago, whenever it was, actually didn't ask you, what would it be in terms of like a developer who's just so blockchain, like I want to go and be a tester or a developer in blockchain? What would you say to yourself? Like go and read or study what?
Go and buy Adam at ICO. But other than that, it's I wish I would have actually read more about distributed systems. Actually, I don't even know, to tell you the truth, to drop names right now. It's like, go read this book. Basically, in general, go read more about distributed systems. Go read more about consensus algorithms. So you can understand what it's about. Because once you do that, it kind of makes sense what blockchain is. You don't really have to think about it too much. And I guess when you think about it, it's not the first consensus algorithm out there, nor the last. It's the one that we work with, and it's the one that says 2/3, as long as you have 2/3 of your network running, your network's fine. So it addresses a specific case. Whereas you have other algorithms that address different use cases, like Raft or a bunch of others. But yeah, that's definitely one of the things. Go read up on distributed systems so you understand how they work, and then you can understand if your application is a fit for it.
For sure. I think IT is definitely was that one thing that just understanding computing, not IT, sorry, but computing, and like the way like architectures work makes life so much simpler to understand blockchains, understand that there is no magical little gnome that sits inside of the database and does something. But I still want to ask you that, because I didn't really go that way. You mentioned Romania, you mentioned Informal Systems, you mentioned Cephalopod already started after Informal Systems. You mentioned gaming a lot. So I'm kind of trying to glue it all together. I don't want to get too personal, obviously, where you don't want to go, but what's the story?
It was an accident purely. I was in a traditional fintech corporation around 2014, and then Greg, a colleague of mine, quit and started to work for Tendermint. Not really sure exactly how he got into it. I think he may have gotten just recruited. He was also from a traditional fintech background. He used to work at Morgan Stanley.
Wow, cool.
So he started working there, and we had a soccer game that we played every week, and he kept talking about it. And then at some point, when I kind of got fed up with where I was working, I started working at an investment fund, and I wasn't exactly super happy there. And he was like, "Hey, you want to come work for blockchain?" And at first, I was, how many people in the in the DevOps and SRE industry are like, "Ooh, blockchain, it's a scam, leave me alone." And then he kept badgering me, and then he brought me in, and I guess I met Ethan on the first day, which is always a good introduction to the ecosystem. So from there on, I started talking to him, and it wasn't even about blockchain. It was about work in general, and how hard we make it for ourselves right now, how inefficient and how exploitative everything is. We went down that rabbit hole, and I was like, wow, what is this even all about? And I did not know that these are the kinds of things that these people talk about, at work. So I was hooked from day one. That was it. It wasn't even the technical side. It was talking about work and how to work and how to treat your employees better and how to not work, how to disconnect from. That's probably one of the biggest flaws that I see right now with the ecosystem is that they're always connected. There's no second at which they're not on. My personal goal is to preach this from the top, the highest mountain. Is like, slow down, man. Take a day off. Think about other things. Ideas will come that way.
It's a huge topic. I think that more and more people are coming to the realization of that. And it started, I think I read somewhere a while ago. So I'm gonna sell it as it is, and then this is something that I heard. The amount of information of data that our brain processes on an average day, just by reading, let's say, for example, the New York Times Sunday paper from core to core, is more than 100 years ago. That the amount of data that the person would process during their lifetime, and that bombardment with data is essentially well, I mean, yes, the brain has so much capacity to store information, but only to probably, and I guess this is where blockchain comes in, and being a 24/7 kind of thing, and it's crazy. I totally understand. Is that what you mean, the amount of things that we have to remember and process?
Well, that's one. That's definitely one of them. But I mean, just in general, people don't take a break. They always think about it. I find it's a bit unhealthy, right? Because then you get into this bubble and you kind of forget that there's the reason why it's important is because if you want to make blockchain work, you have to understand where it fits with the rest of the world, right? You can't just live on the blockchain. You have to incorporate it into. I guess what I'm getting at, it has to be. It's a tool. It can't become our life. It's just a tool.
Sorry to interrupt. It's my favorite sentence. It's a tool. It's not the goal. And man, it's just totally agree with it.
Yeah, the goal, as I see right now, probably the biggest thing that can come up that's the most obvious that will come out of blockchain, I think, is that the way we organize ourselves and the way we cooperate. So I think that's where we should focus our attention, is to use this tool to better cooperate, to better understand without always having this misinformation here. It's use the tool to understand and trust, which is funny because blockchain is all about not trusting anything. But ideally, that's what it would end up in, increasing the trust between people, which would solve, not to go there, but it would solve all of our problems.
Interesting that a lot of things assume that automatically blockchain is well, it's not a P2P technology. It's the man in the middle between the two people. It's called a blockchain. P2P is if I exchange something thoughts with you, and then it would be P2P. But because we don't, and it's beautiful, man. I totally agree with every single word there, because it's sad when people forget that the goal is humanity and not money, not anything else, not technology, not whatever, but it's just the survival. Well, I guess survival at some places, but whatever. Man, but what do you do being obviously breaking software at some points, developing software, taking care of a huge validator, in my opinion, even though you guys, and I like that you don't have a lot of networks, which means you can concentrate on bringing value to the ones that you do instead of validating every single thing just because you can put up a node there. What do you do to help you not to burn out and not to completely go crazy?
Oh, I definitely have mastered the art of disconnecting. When I consider my day over, it's done. And obviously, I'm on call, so servers don't care about humanity. But other than that, I completely just get disconnected. I stop reading about anything. I just go and play with my daughter, play Legos, go for walks. Walking. It's very underrated. People really need to start walking more. Go outside, and then not alone too. I mean, you can do it alone. That's also a form of meditation. But walk and talk with people. It's a very underrated activity. But in general, socialize with people. Just go outside, talk to people, or go to their houses, I guess, play board games, something not completely unrelated. I almost burnt out a couple of times as the years passed, and I found that it has to be done. You just have to completely disconnect, turn off your notifications, put your phone away. I leave without my phone. I leave my phone at home when I leave house many times. Straight up, just disconnect. Don't overdo it. And I know it's hard, right? I still have that tugging feeling. It's oh man, what it's always in the back of my head. I could have done this, and what did the news line say? And yeah.
Man, this is very, very good. I like the insight because everybody mentions burnout, but sometimes when you ask a lot of guests, what do you guys then do? will get very like, I don't know, like that, and then it just shows that people really do burn out, and they really do need a break. They really do need to understand that, hey, guys, there is a whole different world out there. Is there anything else that you would like to add in terms of like the work that you guys do that I didn't ask in Cephalopod that you would like to mention or to talk about, or at Informal maybe some news that you want to share or anything like that?
Well, we're definitely, so to your point about being on networks that you're not just throwing a note up, the ones that we're on, we're looking to make a significant contribution outside of just a note. In particular, are the name Cephalopod. We're actually going to fully embrace that. We plan to, we've been looking, I should say, a number of organizations that do deep sea studies that look at ways to clean up the oceans. So we're looking at ways to contribute to that, either financially, some of them are asking for donations, or in any other way possible, maybe even see if there's any way to combine science with what we do. So we're going full bore into that. We do need more people because it's a hard thing to keep track, but we plan to embrace it with all of our 7 or 8 arms, depending on what type of octopus you are.
That's really cool. That's really interesting to see validators starting to reach out to the real world as well, and kind of like try to not just say we're going to change the world, but we're not going to like have anything to do with the real world. It's interesting. It's cool that you guys are going that way. Man, thanks for this really honest, very, very honest opinions and very honest conversations from not the very technical side, but the somewhat technical side. And it's always cool to see a different opinion, always cool to hear it. I enjoyed it a lot. Thanks.
Well, thanks for having me here. And now that I did it once, I'm getting a taste for it.
Yeah. Thanks very much, man.
Well, thank you again.